I think just given those results, we have our job cut out for the panel on what we're going to be talking about, adaptability in managing talent. But before I go on, I have to share that after all these years of speaking at conferences, I'm still not sure which is a more difficult slot to be a part of. The one after lunch, where everybody has had food and then they want a siesta, or before lunch, where you're trying to talk about talent and people are wondering, is there strawberry cheesecake or Black Forest for lunch? So let me put you out of your misery. I have it from confirmed sources. We have both. So now that we have got that out of the way, we can focus on more trivial things like adaptability in talent. So keeping with the slot, our panel decided we're going to keep it informal, keep it light, more like a fireside chat, have a little fun with this. And so as a start, I thought I'll do a little quick activity to get everybody warmed up here, all right? Don't use your brain too much. Go with the gut answer that you have to this question. And no, I'm not going to be giving you any more data that's on screen than what's on screen. So here's a scenario. You've been asked to choose the world's next political leader. And yours is the only vote that counts. So take this very seriously. And here is the information about the three candidates. Like it's all about recruitment and talent management. So this is what has come up about the three candidates. Candidate A associates with crooked politicians, consults astrologers, 8 to 12 martinis in a day, has a mistress and chain smokes. Well, these are politicians. Candidate B, kicked out of political office twice, slept till noon, used opium in college, drinks a quart of whiskey every day, had an affair with his secretary. Now, I don't think LinkedIn is still capturing a lot of this external data. That you might want to think about it. The third candidate is a decorated war hero, a vegetarian, never smokes, occasionally drinks, and has never cheated on his wife. So we won't use technology. Let's go the old-fashioned way, all right? How many of you are going to vote for candidate A by a show of hands? All right, we have a few. All right, good. There's a post-session after this on discerning between talent. Candidate B, how many of you are going to vote for candidate B? Okay, a larger number for candidate B. And candidate C? How many of you are going to vote for candidate C? Majority of them. And I voted for candidate C myself. Do you guys want to know who these people are? You want to know who these people are? All right. Candidate A is Franklin Roosevelt. Candidate B is Winston Churchill. And together, ladies and gentlemen, you and I have collectively elected So if you ever needed a story about the importance of looking and gathering good data before you recruit, you have it here. But the reason I'm sharing this story also with you is because you should not believe everything you think, right? Especially when we are living in the times that we are living in. Hari spoke to you this morning about mega trends. Mega trends come and go. But there are a few realities of the times that we are living in that's going to stay with us. The demand that we look at talent differently and we look at places where we think we'll find talent differently. So, for example, the Minds presentation we shared this morning. So while megatrends come and go, there's one reality that is not going to change for a few decades, which is that we are living in a VUCA world. What does VUCA stand for? VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. This is the world we are living in. This is the world where an entire aircraft vanishes from the sky and all the governments and the machinery and the technology can't help us find it. This is the world where we are living in, where we try and make predictions for employment options in a year, but something as simple as volcanic ash can throw an entire industry in disarray. So how are we going to cope? What are the mechanisms? What is the data? What is the strategy for navigating in a VUCA world? Tools and mindsets that originated in the manufacturing economy are not going to support us in the VUCA world. Which is when I talk, I don't talk of leadership. Because there is no ship to run anymore. I talk of leader shift. Leaders today have to help their organizations and their people make a series of very carefully calculated shifts that allow them to adapt to this new normal. And since it's a LinkedIn conference, and you wouldn't think I'm smart enough if I didn't share any statistics with you, for those of you who are left brains, here are some statistics. How prepared are we for this world? 51% could not name the CEO successor. 40% had no viable internal candidate for the job. 86% of the CEOs agree that partnerships were the most important element of innovation, and only 21% were able to build them. And 60% of the future jobs need skills that only 20% of the workforce currently has. And finally, over 50% of new ideas for future products and services will flow in from outside the organization. So whereas almost 60% of you people in the room responded that they are very confident about your company's ability to future-proof, I would ask you to reflect a bit about how you are faring on some of these metrics in comparison to what the data is showing us. I would like to begin the discussion now by inviting our panelists on stage who have experience of operating in this VUCA environment. The first one I want to invite is Advait from PwC. But before we do that, I want to just share this little quick video with you, which I think will set the stage for what Advait is going to start talking about, which is that even the best of the tools that we have don't work unless the people who we are working with get it. And so can we show the video real quick as to what we are talking on, why it's important to understand
sometimes
this.
Doctors make mistakes. Anna, you have to try twice as hard to fix them. Are you using your inhaler?
All the time. Go through one a week.
You sure you're using it right?
Do I look like an idiot?
No. Why don't you show me how your inhaler works?
Jerk.
So to help us figure out how the inhaler works, please welcome Advait from PwC. And also Fionn from LinkedIn.
Hi.
Nice to see you. It's good to see you, Fionn.
Good to see you.
So keeping in the spirit of the fireside chat, we're going to not do any more slides anymore. And we'll just jump into the question and see where it takes us. So let me begin with you, Advait. When we are talking about the scenarios of the VUCA world, where we are clearly trying to feel our way through and building the aircraft as we are flying it almost, given your experience in the region, and you worked so extensively across APAC in different countries, what do you think are some of the key competencies that organizations should be focusing on as they try and develop their people and their organization to operate in this new normal?
Sure, thanks, Tanvi. To answer that question, I'd like to give a quick context of a study that PwC and LinkedIn conducted together. It's called Adapt to Survive. The reports are available on either websites. So we put PwC's human capital metrics database and LinkedIn's rich base of more than 277 million users to really answer a few key questions. First was, why do some countries enjoy higher productivity as compared to the others in this VUCA world? How much extra does it cost employers if they hire less than perfect candidates? And lastly, what role do online professional networks play in enabling good practice in talent management, right? I'm not going to get into the mechanics of the study, but the study clearly demonstrated the positive impact of adaptable talent on productivity. So if it is productivity that we are all after, then the key here is really to attract and build a workforce with a focus on adaptability. Now, how did we define adaptability? We defined it on two fronts. The first, it is about individuals' propensity to take on new challenges, new skills, new jobs, It is also about the employers being ready to take on talent from a variety of sources. Not the same schools, not the same universities, not the same academic skills. Now, when it comes to competencies, VUCA as a concept, it's evolving, right? So there's no empirical research to kind of put down competencies and skills. So it's probably a job for researchers even. But a few things are clearly emerging. So technology, for example, cuts across all domains, all themes. So it is increasingly a competency which organizations will need to have and organizations will need to look for in candidates. But I can tell you this, what organizations can really look for or test for is the absence of highly transferable attributes such as communication, problem solving, collaboration, and try hard to further develop that in its workforce to make them more adaptable in this VUCA world.
Yeah, I like what you said about of not using the traditional metrics for identifying talent. So as part of a Twitter chat last night where we were talking about what does the future of work look like and what are some of the things that will change. And one of the things that came up was that we will need to start looking beyond degrees and traditional markers of talent if we really want to operate in an environment where things are changing so constantly that your internal response needs to be as diversified as your external environment if you're really trying to meet that challenge. So I really like that. But Fionn, from you, what I'm trying to want to know is based on what Advait said about the role of technology. How is technology preparing us to better meet the demands of this environment? How does analytics play into predictions in an environment where, your predictions could change tomorrow morning? Or how can technology help us build a response set to the VUCA environment?
Right. So, Tanvi, that's an interesting question because if you look at it, technology is both an enabler as well as a contributor to the vast data points that is going on across the social media platforms like LinkedIn. Billions of interactions happened per week, and you've got updates, sharing, like what we're doing this morning. Lots of interactions going on. So lots of data points flowing across. And data really is, like the whole big data is only as good as it is. If it just sits in a data warehouse, it's of no value at all. And it is the actions that we take that we can actually get results out of that data. So, for example, in LinkedIn, we invest very heavily in terms of the insights that we get out of the data points to make decisions out of that. So, for example, like what Hari shared this morning, our 2013 research shows that you look at the technology, when the company needs talent in the technology sectors, the first country they think about is California, Silicon Valley. But in the last 2013 insights analytics that we pull out, we show that the top 5 cities actually came from India. Hyderabad, Pune, Chennai, and Bangalore. And San Francisco was ranked number 5. So these are useful information that really help organizations to make decisions in terms of where they can get the skills. Universities are also beginning to use these skills, these data sets, to understand what are the skills that they need to equip the future students, the future professionals, in order to be equipped for the workforce of tomorrow.
Yeah. And I think that the workforce of tomorrow is a topic of discussion in its own right, because we are finding that more and more, and this is where my university biases start to creep in, we find that the traditional pedagogy may not necessarily be serving the kind of employees that we are looking for. And, LinkedIn of late has been putting a lot of emphasis on the learning element through technology to keep people, current with the kind of trends that are going on, and as well as connect them with the influencers and the latest research out there, et cetera. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that on, in terms of the skill or competency building and the role of technology in that space.
Right. So in terms of skills, when you look at just giving an example that we talked about this morning, talent acquisitions is no longer just about talent acquisitions. It's about being a marketeer. It's about being able to bring up the talent brand itself. So companies that is able to actually understand the needs of the employers, playing a very big role in helping their employees to be adaptable, definitely has got tremendous value that they can reap out of it. So in a recent study that we, LinkedIn and PwC did, there was actually $160 billion of savings globally if we are able to become more adaptable. In Singapore itself, there's 280 million of savings. So becoming a lot more adaptable is actually an important skill that employees as well as employers needs to harness. And if you think about that, companies that really invest in internal mobility has a huge opportunity, has a huge advantage over other organizations because they invest very heavily in employees' development in terms of professional development as well as giving opportunities to employees that enables them to grow across geographies as well as across functions. Who don't want to work for a company that gives them the opportunities?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And also in terms of the development, I was looking at some research which said that actually as far as leadership development is concerned, the retention from training programs sometimes is as low as 10%, but when peer-to-peer learning is taking place through technology, the retention and learning of new skills that allow you to be adaptable is as high as 80%. So, that's a statistic to reckon with. Before I kind of move on to the next question, I just want to remind you that we will be looking at the questions you have been posting towards the end of the session, so please feel free to feed your questions in. Please feel free to vote on other people's questions because we're going to leverage technology to make sure that the most pressing questions kind of rise to the top and we have time to talk about it. So this is not a one-way conversation. We are going to be definitely looking at you very soon to see how, what are some of the concerns we're hearing from you or comments that you want to highlight. So, it's all great to be talking about, technology and adaptability, et cetera, but talent acquisition doesn't exist in a vacuum. We need to take a systems perspective when we are talking about surviving in a VUCA world, and there are these multiple interrelated parts that have to hang together, so to speak, right? So I was hoping, Advait, you could comment a little bit about how the surrounding HR processes, whether it's in terms of rewards or compensation or any other aspect, how do you think they will need to start changing in order to be an attractive employer? We just talked about the whole branding aspect of it, to attract the best talent. What are some of the key shifts that you are seeing for employers when they think about traditional processes being adapted to the new world?
Sure. Look, it really starts with the tone that the organization adopts towards adaptability of talent, towards adapting, accepting the need for adaptability and then rewarding it, right? A key question for HR professionals, I'm in the HR profession as well, is to really ask, are our managers or leaders consuming talent or producing talent? And how then are we encouraging them to balance the short-term priorities with longer-term requirements of the organization, right? Take, for example, the reward structure. The reward structure may unintentionally penalize employees for taking on international assignments or transfers across territories instead of considering the long-term benefit of such a move, right? If you look at L&D programs, when we work with organizations who have adaptable workforces, what we see is that encouraging employees to think about different cycles of experience is the way of life, right? Discussing international assignments, stretch projects, this is something organizations encourage all the time because all these experiences are going to give your employees different skills which will help them to adapt with the future. Now, making this shift is not really easy, but it requires a combination of hard and soft measures and innovative approaches, ranging from management sponsorship to changes in your policies around performance, rewards, and careers.
Yeah. And I think that change in mindset, I often joke when I'm at such sessions that in some ways when we think about traditional ways of looking for talent and rewarding them, that in a lot of companies, if Steve Jobs had come to apply for a job today, he would probably get rejected. Why? Because he had a 2-year break in his resume when he was sitting at an ashram in India meditating on something, whatever that was. But I think that there needs to be this recognition that careers are changing as well. We are no longer talking about linear careers. We're talking about non-linear careers. We are talking about careers not as much as a ladder as a lattice, so to speak. And I think that, the role of technology in enabling that lattice, that movement, the ability to stay connected even though you may be on a break. And I know there are a lot of parents in the audience and mothers in the audience. When they take a career break, how do you still stay connected to the world of work, so to speak? And it's not counted against you, right?
Absolutely.
So, but given the time and the fact that we'll be moving to questions, I was wondering if you could share, either of you, which companies do you think, in your point of view, are kind of stepping away from the mold or have caught your attention in terms of doing a really good job of managing differently in this type of an environment?
Yeah, so I'll start, and perhaps, in my interactions with organizations, there's quite a few organizations that comes up to mind that they have beginning to do things differently. One of the most common trend that we're seeing is how companies are beginning to look at passive candidates versus active candidates. And by that we mean, if you just continue to look at the active candidates, meaning that people that are actively looking for jobs, you're really looking at a very small minority. In Singapore, we're talking about 25% of people that are actively looking. But when you extend the search to also passive candidate, it goes up to 4 times the size. So, already we are seeing organizations, companies, looking for candidates in a very different ways. Gone are the days where they just look at active candidates. They now also look at passive candidates. One particular company that came to mind was Intel. So many of you are very familiar with the Intel being very successful as inside Intel. And they've been known as a hardware company for many years. And for them to recruit talent in the software space was actually getting very hard because, the talent recognized them as a hardware company. So when Intel set up their office in Bangalore, they actually worked with LinkedIn to actually help them to reposition their talent brand as a company that needed software talent. They actively used LinkedIn as a platform. They created different blogs. The recruiters really changed very quickly, adaptable, and participated in the blogs, created groups. And today they have got thousands of followers. They were able to build a talent brand that is not just about hardware. They were able to position themselves as a great employer to attract both hardware and software engineers. So it's quite a transformation in terms of what Intel has done in India.
Yeah. So leveraging the power of the social and community aspect to kind of shift the perceptions they have about themselves in the market. Very interesting. Advait, how about you?
So we keep working with clients to build their workforce plans on client engagements. But one example which we came across, it really stands out, and it's a classic example of this adaptation. So we conducted this study for one of the governments in Southeast Asia in the oil and gas sector to study the talent demand and supply gaps for that region. Now, the oil and gas industry has very peculiar talent challenges, right? Especially the upstream business. In that, they require employees with a minimum of 7 to 8 years of experience before they consider them ready. And what I mean by ready is for them to be able to independently make decisions on the ground. And these businesses, I'm sure many of you would already know, if you have any disruptions in upstream activity, every minute, small time periods can cause losses of millions of dollars. So this activity is very, very high risk, very, very valuable, and therefore the need to manage talent in that space is very high. But you see, if it takes 7 to 8 years for individuals to get ready to handle such projects, the workforce planning activity in that domain has to be very, very different. We spoke to a lot of HRDs from some of the biggest global oil companies who had offices in that region. And they said, look, the activity in the upstream business will kind of move along with the oil prices in the market, and you can't predict oil prices 7 to 8 years hence. So you have this scenario where the activity suddenly shoots up, but you want talent which may or may not be ready. And therefore, you will see in oil and gas, it's always a global talent pool, right? People are moving all across. Most global oil companies already have policies where employees are required to move every 4 years across territories. Having said that, the demand is still not met. And there's this one particular position within the upstream activity for mechanical engineers who specialize in rotating equipment management, right? It's a highly skilled job. And they clearly weren't enough. So a lot of these global oil companies, they started thinking innovatively. And what they've started doing now is introducing reskilling programs by taking on mechanical engineers from the aviation industry, reskilling them for their industry and deploying them, which drastically reduces the time required to put them or deploy them on the job. Not only that, they're also tracking. So, for example, if you look at the global demographics in the West, the average age of oil and gas workers is quite high. They're highly experienced, but they're retiring. So that's a lot of knowledge going out of the oil and gas sector globally. So this government has also launched a program to attract those retiring people into this geography to train people and upskill them as quickly as possible. Now, that's an innovative approach, according to us, to be able to make your workforce really adaptable.
Right. So look outside what you think would be the traditional places you'll find
Absolutely.
your talent. Look at cohorts that you would not have traditionally considered. And one quick company that I want to reference while we're talking about things being done differently is one of the companies I have been studying, which is HCL. And I don't know how many of you have heard or seen this, but I would encourage you to look it up. HCL earlier this year became the first company to carry out an end-to-end recruitment on Twitter. How's that for innovative? The hashtag you want to look up is the coolest interview ever, and you'll get a lot of information about how they stepped out of the traditional mold to engage what Fionn was referring to as the passive talent that might be around, but you may not have been considering. So can we have the questions? I want to see what is it that the audience has been talking about while we have been up here. Can we have them up on the screen, or Virginia, do you have them?
I do have the questions. We should be able to reflect them up. Let's go to the questions. Those are the polling answers. And these are the questions. How cool is that, by the way? I'm sorry, I just have to say it. So we have the first question. I don't know if you can see it, but I can read it out loud, which has the most votes, which is employee referral program is very important. Do you mind what is the best... Oh, cool. Do you mind what is the best way to make programs most effective without focusing only on rewarding in cash? Add some grammar to that, and that's the question. That is the one that this audience loved the best. So net, how do you make an effective employer referral program without using cash?
I'll share from my personal experience in terms of how do you encourage employees to be your great ambassador. So in LinkedIn itself, we use this, which is an amazing company. I work for LinkedIn, so the culture itself, the whole culture and the values of what this company represents is amazing. What stands out for me is how it strongly encourages employees to be your advocate. So, LinkedIn as a platform has that ability for socially engaged companies. So when I say socially engaged companies, I mean companies that strongly encourage their employees to be actually on the social media platform to proactively be the strongest advocate. When your employees themselves are your advocate, they naturally attract people that are interested and in turn will reach out to your employees themselves for job opportunities. So it doesn't have to work in a way that the employees have to be sort of referral and hence get a cash. It can be multifaceted in a sense of really encouraging your employees to be your advocate so that they are a representation of what the company represents. And that can be done at scale because you've got so many employees in your company.
Yeah. It's almost talking about it being a pull factor rather than a push factor. And I think the social piece of this conversation is really important because at any given point in time, the world is looking at your employees as ambassadors of your brand. Yep. And so that's an important point. Advait?
Yep. I mean, honestly, I think, I'm not sure really whether we can take cash out of the equation. I mean, sometimes it's required to give it that thrust, the program. I'm not sure how many agree, but really some of the new trends that I've recently come across. I was speaking to this lady who runs the Asia Pac business. There's the HR systems company. They sell HR systems to organizations, and they are introducing. They've done a project for an Australian company, and they said they call it gamification. So what they have is a social media equivalent within the organization. So you have your profiles just like you have on Facebook and LinkedIn within your organization. And you have ratings. And some of the ratings come from having provided things like referrals. So if you are referring, you are a more valued employee, and that's reflected in the ratings that the organization gives you. Over a period of time, they're still working out how to recognize that employee for having higher ratings. But that's a way to rally people around such programs without necessarily just focusing on the cash component of employee referrals.
Great. And that's answering the, how many people? What, 39 people? 36. So we've at least addressed 36 of you in the audience with that, which is good. We are a minute and 30 seconds over. Are we able to take one more question, Virginia? All right. So let's see.
8 minutes.
Oh, we do have 8 minutes? Okay, good. You'll need to wave to me when you want me to stop, okay? All right. What's the next question?
What are the 3 sustainable skills that employers are looking for in hiring and talent?
The 3 sustainable skills that employers are looking for in thinking ahead.
Right. I mean, I can take that. We'll be talking of really transferable skills here because I'm sure all companies have their competency frameworks and have their skill inventory. So they will need to continue to focus on that. But like I mentioned earlier, if you're talking of a global workforce, a highly adaptable workforce, which sustains you over a longer term, even when things change in a VUCA world, I think it would be those transferable attributes such as, collaborating with people across territories within your networks, highly important. Communication, of course, stands you in good stead all the time, and problem solving. I think those would be the top 3 skills that we've actually even identified as a part of that study.
I think that's very well articulated. Over and above, one of the skills that I'm beginning to see as an essential skill in many different areas, be it HR practitioners, talent acquisitions, or even business leaders, is the ability to actually harness data to be making decisions. So when we talk about big data, the ability to really take the data, making sense out of it, and making decisions, I think is one of the critical skills that we're beginning to see more and more apparent due to the fact that there's just so overwhelming amount of information. How do you make a wise decision out of that big data that you're having? And I think that's one of the critical skills.
One of the key skills, absolutely. Would agree.
Yeah, and I think that, what I'd like to add to that is moving slightly away from the technology piece, but I think in terms of skills that will be required across industries, across time, I think, is the ability to unlearn what you have learned. I think that's going to be one of the most important skills going forward, that you cannot get so rooted in what you learned yesterday that you can't learn what you need to do to survive in the new world. So the ability to quickly unlearn and relearn is a capability I find more and more employees are looking for. And I think while we're talking of competencies, we also should be talking about attitudes. And this is where, in order to survive in a VUCA world, I can becomes more important than IQ. And I think that we need to be looking out for that attitude of operating in a VUCA world where we are saying, I can do this. This is something that I can take on. And lastly, I think is this ability of people to learn from failure and move very quickly. Because it's not a question of if you will fail. It's a question of when you will fail, because you will fail. And I often tend to mention to people that your failure rate determines your growth rate. It's about as simple as that. So I think that if you can find people who have that can-do attitude, who are willing to take failure, in their stride and move with it, and learn and unlearn really quickly, you are going to get a set of employees that will go past any, is able to move quickly in an environment that evolves rapidly. Now, that's the only addition I would make. Do we have time for one more question?
We do. And actually, in the time that you answered that, there were 4 more votes for the question that you were answering. So it was a very popular question.
So clearly, we are pandering to the crowds.
So the next one comes up, which looks like it's the one with the 23 votes. 20 votes, okay. It said that we are living in a VUCA world, which was said by you all, so it is said. How can the employer be ready for the next wave of the workforce in the next 5 to 10 years to enable the talents to be VUCA savvy?
Can you
let me ad-lib the question the way I understand it, which is, yes, the employers and organizations are in a VUCA world, but how do we, as the employers, get ready for a next generation that is already there? So the next generation of the workforce is almost more prepared for VUCA than the organizations themselves right now that are typically run by people that kind of grew up in a different structure and more certainty, arguably.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think, as the famous quote goes, the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. So, you have to start learning from places where, people are already able to make that switch really, really quickly. I mean, an interesting anecdote that I'll share is that, I host Asia's first trending Twitter chat for HR professionals. And I got an email one day from one of the HR vendors saying, we'd like our CEO to be a guest on your Twitter chat. And then I went and looked him up. He doesn't have a Twitter presence. He doesn't have a LinkedIn presence. But he wants to be a part of this conversation. So, it goes back to you must give that which you are seeking. If you are seeking engagement from your workforce, you must learn to engage. If you want to be future ready, you must get into the arena and learn to be future ready. It's not something which, and don't quote me to SMU on this one, that we can teach you in the business school. It's something that comes by doing. More leaders were made by doing than by any case studies or conferences for that matter. So you literally have to take that first step. And going back to what I said earlier, if you're going to fail, you're going to fail, but fail forward. As long as you're learning from that failure, you are going to be moving forward. Was there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah. To that question, I think I'd recently read The War for Talent is Over, and Talent won. Today people can find new job opportunities in a heartbeat. They're all out there, right? People can switch jobs very easily. So as employers, what can we do to prepare? There are really a few things that we can try and do. One is to look at the upcoming sectors, which are those hotspots where things are growing, sectors are growing, because that's where the next challenge is coming from. And these challenges, especially enabled by technology, they spring on you. You're never ready for them. So it's a great idea to look out for those new type of businesses or sectors that are growing. That's number one. Number two, if you really study the HR landscape and track it, the trends over time, you will always find that the talent acquisition space has always grown very rapidly as compared to any other area. You look at software services, you look at the kind of action there is, you look at the headcount movement, it's all around talent attraction and hiring. In this kind of a scenario where there's this next generation of workers, I think it's a great idea to genuinely try and spend time to understand what employees want, because they're going to be able to move very easily. So it's a great idea to try and understand what are their expectations, how do they want to grow, what do they value. I think in one of the earlier sessions, some of the speakers actually mentioned about the fact that they're doing that now, to try and invest really in learning and development, in career mobility, in rewards, catering it to individual segments. I think that's what's really going to give HR that readiness to handle the new workforce.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I totally agree with you. It's interesting that you say that talent won the war. So it's what employers need to do in order to make sure that talent won the war and employers doesn't bleed too much. So I guess a lot of employers, what they really focus on is, I've seen a lot of organizations that invest heavily in internal mobility, meaning that they really take a conscious and deliberate effort in making sure that they really invest in their talent to enable internal mobility within the organizations, and they develop them, invest in the employees so that they continuously help the employees to grow within the organizations. Huge savings, because we all know trying to win a client is a lot more difficult than trying to retain a client. In the same way, winning a talent and then not being able to keep the talent is very hard. So internal mobility is a big thing. The second thing that I see organizations that has done really well in is they really take the whole idea of talent brand very seriously. Organizations that invest hugely in talent brand enables the organizations in recruiting the best talent as well as retaining the right talent as well. Because the right talent knows what it is that who they are working for, and the organizations that they work for is a great company. So it really helps them to retain the talent that they have today.
I'd agree, yeah.
Yeah, I think that a useful analogy to kind of round up some of the things you're saying is that normally when we think about talent acquisition, we are always thinking of it in the hunting mode. Are you able to go out there and catch the best talent and bring it back in? But I think what the panel is encouraging you to do is also to adopt the farming mode, not just the hunting mode. Cultivate the relationships. Think about the future. Plant the seeds today so that you can harvest tomorrow. And platforms like LinkedIn are so phenomenally suited to that farming of relationship building and pipeline building even before you need the talent. That really allows you to be, as an employer, embracing some of the things that will allow you to thrive in the VUCA world. So we don't want to keep you from your cheesecake anymore. So we will wind up with that. Virginia, if you had anything to add.
No, great. Thank you so much. If you can join me in thanking the panel for really a fantastic interaction.